Today we're going to look at a very brave soldier, Calvin's car diary. He's doing his driving test after 20 years. I think he's very brave because I know if I did my driving test after 20 years, I can expect a bad situation. In fact, I remember my driving before I was a driving instructor, and it wasn't pretty at all, in fact. So I hold my hands up to this guy. Fair play, Calvin. Absolutely great. What we're going to do, we're going to pick the best bits out. We're going to have a look at how he was graded, see if we agree with the examiner, see what we think, and yeah, see what we can learn.
Now, I passed my test first time when I was 17 years old. I can't remember how many lessons I had, but it was definitely less than 10. Yeah, I was pretty, I was pretty good, obviously.
That's really good, 10 lessons.
10 lessons, I'm on it tonight.
So Calvin mentions about his 10 hours of driving lessons here, which drives me absolutely bonkers because those days are so over, it's unreal. And the amount of parents you get that say, oh, I passed my lessons in 10 hours, I passed my driving test in 10 hours, so I'm sure my son, he's going to pass in 10 hours. And it's just not realistic. It's an unrealistic expectation that young people have because they see things like this. The parents tell them 10 hours, it just doesn't happen. The biggest thing I've learned that holds people back when they're learning to drive is the fear factor, the fear of other vehicles. And that's the first thing you have to try and get over. It's not the learning itself. It doesn't matter how clever people are. It's how quickly they learn to deal with the other vehicles on the road. And sometimes this can take people, as I say, 10 hours. Sometimes it can take people 40 or 50 hours. And this is all related to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got to feel fulfilled. You've got to feel safe in your environment in order for actual solid learning to take place. And when I say the 10 hours are over, I'm saying 1 in 100, yes, 1 in 100 could potentially pass the driving test in 10 hours. I have had it occasionally, but I'm talking about the average Joe, me and you guys, me and you. Even with the best driving instructor in the world, you are going to really struggle to be anywhere close to being test ready in less than 10 hours. And the only reason I'm really sharing and focusing on this is because it's unrealistic for young people to see and hear people saying, I passed in 10 hours and think, well, I can pass in 10 hours too, because it's just not realistic. It's not going to be possible. It's all down to the fear factor, and I'll tell you why. Roads are far busier than they used to. There's more traffic. If there's more traffic, there's more cars you have to get used to. From 1993 to 2021, we're doing approximately an extra 70 billion miles on the road. Over the last 20 years, we've also got an extra 4 million cars. And you might think, well, Josh, that doesn't sound like too many, but we haven't got all those new roads. We haven't got hundreds of new roads to put those cars on. So we've got the same roads, but an extra 4 million cars. So roads are getting busier and busier, making it harder and harder for people learning to drive to actually get used to driving because everywhere's becoming more and more like a city.
Driving faults.
So if I make one serious driving fault, that's an instant fail, yeah?
Pretty much.
Okay, and what about minors? Is that still a thing?
Minors, yep, so you can get...
So he's explained to Calvin that if you get one serious fault, often people call this major fault, but there's no such thing. If anyone gets a serious fault in your driving test, that is an automatic fail because you've done something that is dangerous enough that's going to put you or someone else at risk. So that's pretty much it. Your test would carry on to the end. So you'd still sit the full 40 minutes, but that would be game over. He also explains to Calvin that you can get up to 14 driving faults and still pass. A lot of people call these minors, exactly the same thing. Just want to share with you that no one that I've ever taught has got 14 minors or even close to it. If you're going to fail your driving test, normally it's going to be because you've got a serious fault, or what he hasn't mentioned to Calvin is if you get between 3 and 5 driving faults in the same category, that will go down as a serious fault. For instance, if you were to not check your mirrors when you needed to 5 times, the driving examiner is then going to put that down as a serious fault. So you wouldn't actually get to the 14 driving faults. If, however, it was something like not checking your blind spot when you really needed to, the examiner may very well put this down as a serious fault if it was 3 or 4 times. Because if you're not checking it 3 or 4 times, it's quite a high risk situation. They're going to deem you not ready for your own driving license.
I've got no idea what I'm going to go through. Could be a little emergency stop. That's the one I'm kind of looking out for, but we don't know. I'm feeling a little bit nervous, but as ever, I am feeling quite confident.
Okay, so 1 in 3 people will actually also do an emergency stop on their driving test on top of one of the 4 driving test maneuvers. You're going to be pretty unlucky to get an emergency stop, but luckily for you, they're extremely easy. Never had anyone fail for the emergency stop because all you've got to do is imagine someone's crossing the road and you need to stop that car. You slam that brake on hard and fast and get that car stopped. Doesn't matter if you stall, doesn't matter what happens. Pretty easy going. The hard bit of it, the time people do fail, is when they drive away and they forget to check the blind spot. So let's see what Calvin does.
A little bit nervous, but as ever, I am feeling quite confident. I do know it's going to be a challenge. I've got no idea what the outcome's going to be, but we're going to...
Calvin said he's feeling pretty nervous here, and I'm not surprised because I would be as well. First of all, he's on camera. That in itself is really freaking nerve-wracking. You know, anytime you've seen any of my mock tests in the past, you're nervous. It's like you've got the entire world watching you, waiting for you to make a mistake. And then on top of that, you've got someone sitting next to you that you feel is judging everything you do. Well, not just feel, they are literally there to judge everything you do. So it's really quite nerve-wracking, even if you've got your driving license already.
The test route while you're following it. Obviously, just make sure you're a defensive driver, and most importantly, no speeding.
No speed, yeah.
Okay, so he's given Calvin two massive tips here. He said, first of all, make sure you're defensive driving. And second, he said, make sure you're not speeding. And the reason he said this is because Calvin's a full license holder, and these are going to be the most common things that you do wrong as a full license holder on any driving test, and actually driving on any roads. And if you don't know what defensive driving is, it literally is what it says on the tin. It's driving defensively, not aggressively. If you come into meeting traffic situations, rather than being that person that thinks, get stuffed, I'm going for it, instead, just trying to avoid situations, avoid road rage, avoid anything that's going to potentially cause an accident or lead someone else into an accident.
Right.
Oh, didn't even take notice of the sat nav. Oh my God.
Poor old Calvin is starting to panic a little bit about the sat-nav and the directions and missing turnings, and the sat-nav is the last thing you need to think about on your driving test, okay? There's two golden rules for your driving test. The first one is a driving test is about safety, not directions. It doesn't matter if you go the wrong way. And the second one is if you're in the wrong lane, just carry on going the wrong way. There is no button on the examiner's tablet to fail you for going the wrong way, but there are plenty of buttons on there to fail you if you try and go the way the sat-nav wants you to in the wrong lane.
Okay, so we're very close to the junction, yeah? We're just gonna drive off when you're ready, please.
A bit close to the junction. I think he's being a little bit mean here. Okay, 2 car lengths, maybe between 1 and 2, but serious fault, I'm not too sure about that one. It's a really quiet road, realistic situation. Don't know if I agree with that one. So Calvin's reversing manoeuvre is the pullover on the right and reverse 2 car spaces. This is one of 4 manoeuvres on the UK driving test. You've also got reverse bay parking in a parking bay, forward bay parking, or parallel parking. I consider this one the easiest manoeuvre on the driving test just because, well, what? You've got to pull over on the right. It's not that difficult. Make sure you're reasonably close to the curb and make sure you're looking behind you nice and slowly going backwards. I would probably give Calvin a serious fault for this situation because Calvin's not looking behind him anywhere near enough. He's looking ahead. He's using his mirror, but he's not looking behind him. That's not going to be good enough to make sure you're spotting anyone and anything as you're reversing backwards. 2 golden rules for reversing. Rule number 1, walking pace. If your car's going any faster than you would be walking, it's too fast. Rule number 2, looking behind you anytime you are going backwards. If we're going forwards, we look forwards. If we're going backwards, we look backwards. That simple. At the end of any maneuver just like this, the examiner is going to ask you, are you happy with this maneuver? It's not a trick. It's not, is it okay? They're asking you, are you happy with it? And they're not going to tell you if it's wrong. So if you're not happy with it, then say, no, I'm not, and carry on fixing it. Don't be scared to ask the examiner to open the door if you want to have a look at how far you are from the lines. It's absolutely fine. Just make sure your car's secure.
Right, Calvin, if you could tell me how you'd switch your rear fog lights on and explain to me when you would need to use them.
With the switch on the right-hand side here.
This is the most common question that people actually get wrong. With all the show me, tell me questions, there are key words. This particular question, the key word is when visibility is less than 100 meters. The 100 meters is the key word. And everyone says when it gets foggy, it's not fog. It could be raining, could be snow, could be anything. You've got to use the key word, which is 100 meters to get the point or not lose the point, so to speak.
Tell me when it's safe, no worries.
The point in time when I'd use my rear fog lights is when the fog is heavy. When we've got fog on the road, mate.
Calvin's fallen into the trap that many learners have fallen into.
After 200 yards,
slow down, please,
go
yeah?
around the roundabout and take the second exit. Water each of the road.
Oh, your speed thing says 30 and that says 20.
He's watching the sat-nav speed and they haven't been updated for about 10 years, including the DVSA driving test examiner sat-navs as well. They will be well out of date. I've had a few students that fail because the sat-nav says 60 miles per hour or 40 miles per hour and it's a 30 mile per hour zone. Never trust the sat-nav. And what this particular examiner has let Calvin down with is at the beginning of the driving test, the examiner will always say to you before the driving test starts, do not trust the speed on the sat-nav because it is not accurate. So actually, it's not really fair for poor old Calvin there. However, saying that, there's no excuses. If he does trust the sat-nav and he goes too fast, he's got a full license at the end of the day. He should know better. It does also depend on how far Calvin was going over the speed limit. You know, driving test examiners are realistic. If you're going 3 or 4 miles over the speed limit, normally you'll just end up with a driving fault. Unless you continue to do this throughout the driving test, you will just end up with a driving fault. If you start going 5, 6 miles per hour over the speed limit, you could start looking at a serious fault. And if you're going to get further above that, you are 100% getting a serious fault because they will tell you to slow down. And if they tell you to slow down, it's game over. No, instead of following the sat-nav speed limit, instead you've got a very basic rule. If there are street lights, treat it as a 30-mile-per-hour zone. If there are no street lights, treat it as a national speed limit zone. If it's anywhere in between, you're going to have regular repeater signs, which are the small speed signs all the way down the road, around every 10 seconds or less, which will show you what the speed limit is. If it is a 20 zone, it is going to be very well signposted, normally with road markings on the road and 20-mile-per-hour signs on the side as well. And they should mark it very well because it's a 20 zone. It's a 20 zone for a reason. Probably outside of school, so they're not going to want you to miss the speed limit.
Do you indicate to come off of a minor roundabout?
In short, no. If we come to a mini roundabout and we're turning left, we signal left. If we're going right, we signal right. If you're going straight on, there is absolutely no point in signaling, no point in signaling off the roundabout at all, because at the end of the day, why are you signaling? You're signaling to tell people what you plan to do, not what you're doing. They can see you're already going there. So if you do signal, how long's the signal going to be on for? A second? Maybe a second and a half is a waste of time. There's absolutely no point. Treat mini roundabouts more like crossroads with regards to signaling. That way you're not going to confuse anyone, you're not going to waste your own time.
Mock driving test, Calvin.
That's the end. Right, drum roll. Hold on.
What do you
Question, what do I think?
So everyone hates this question at the end of the driving test, at the end of mock test, or at the end of anything. You know, how do you think it went? What's your feedback? But it is really important because with driving lessons, the driving instructor doesn't actually fix the mistakes, you fix the mistakes. The driving instructor just tells you what mistakes you're making. Once you know what you're making, you then start to fix them. So with the feedback, trying to get you to understand what actually mistakes you've made is the really important bit there, because then you can actually fix them in future. I will tell you that he failed for sure. 1, he wasn't looking behind him when reversing, and 2, he was speeding. Normal, we expected it from the beginning. As for the speeding, you will have a little bit of wiggle room, anywhere between 3 and 5 miles an hour, but it does depend on what the speed limit is. If it's a 20, it could be a lot less. The junction, in my opinion, pretty harsh. Poor old Calvin there. Didn't deserve a serious fault, in my opinion. Nice quiet road, bit of common sense, but hey ho, that's just my opinion. Overall, I thought Calvin did absolutely fantastic there after not driving for 20 years. Probably a lot better than I could have done. And I reckon if he did it again, he'd do a lot better.
But as you get older, we don't worsen as drivers. We are still very good drivers, lots of us. In fact, we get better as we get on the roads. But I think we've just become more aware of what's around us. Therefore, we're probably more relaxed about.
And Calvin's talking about human instinct here. He's absolutely right. You know, they talk about once you get your license, that's when you actually learn to drive. And that's what they're talking about. You get your license, you actually start to build an awareness around the car. You start to repeat things. If something works and you don't have an accident, you start to repeat that. Nothing goes wrong, you repeat it again, and you realize this is how you drive safely on the road. The real bad part of that, though, is because you repeat things and perhaps you start repeating not checking your mirrors when you should be checking them, and you don't crash immediately, you start repeating this and create this habit where you no longer check your mirrors and you get lazy until one day you knock a cyclist off the bike, or you end up in the side of the car and then you start remembering again, oh yeah, should be checking my mirrors. So that is the bad part of actually human instincts on the roads. We repeat this habit of not doing things and then, well, I thought Calvin did really, really well in this. If you are looking to pass your driving test or just learn how to drive really well on the roads, have a look at my online driving course, Josh at joshthedrivinginstructor.com, or in the link just above there. If you've got any questions, find me on Instagram. I am Josh the Driving Instructor, and I'll see you all soon.